I'm Alex, founder of careerlaunchcampus.com, and I run a Job Offer Accelerator on School. Every single day of the week, I run a Q&A with a different theme where you give me your questions related to job search, and then I go ahead and answer them. Okay, so I've selected 10 questions related to today's theme, diagnosis and market alignment. I'm going to run through them. So I've selected these 10 questions. It's a mix of people that have reached out to me on LinkedIn, people that have reached out to me on my other social platforms on Instagram and TikTok, and also ad hoc questions from inside the accelerator as well. So let's jump into things. Okay. I've applied to over 300 jobs and had 2 interviews. What am I doing wrong? Okay, so 300 applications, 2 interviews. Okay, I want to tell you what that number actually means. Okay, because it's not usually what you think it means. Okay, it does not mean that you need to apply harder or you need to apply more. Okay, before I go further, I do want to say that this sort of volume is genuinely exhausting. 300 applications is months of evenings and weekends and just generally hoping that something works, okay? And getting almost nothing back for it grinds you down in a way that people who haven't done it at all will never really understand. Okay, so I'm not going to skip past that part. I do appreciate that it can be a real strain on your motivation and in some cases mental health, but here's the honest part. Okay, 300 applications with 2 interviews is not a volume problem. Okay, it's not a matter of effort and it's not a want for trying. Okay, and we're really clear about what it means because it's the opposite of what most people will conclude or diagnose. Okay, it means that applying to another 300 won't fix this issue. Okay, so don't go ahead and just apply to more. Okay, all that will do is it will make you more tired, more discouraged, and 6 months further into your job search, okay, you'll still have the exact same underlying issues. So if we just break down the numbers, because this is actually useful. So 2 interviews out of 300, okay, let's just say 300, no, it says over 300, but 2 interviews from 300 applications is a response rate that's under 1%. Okay, what that number tells me is that the problem is happening right at the top of the funnel. Okay, so the problem's happening before any recruiter or hiring team or human, whoever it may be, has actually had a conversation with you. Okay, which is genuinely good news. Okay, and I know that might sound strange, but it's good news because it rules out a lot. Okay, what we're going to do here is diagnose the issue. So it's nothing to do with your interview technique. It's not your presence. It's not how you look. It's not the way you do your hair. It's not your answers or how you come across in person. Okay, because nobody's got that far into a process with you to assess any of that. So it's going to be one of 2 things. Okay, and usually it'll be both of these things. So either the roles that you're applying to were never a strong fit in the first place, or your resume is not making the case for the ones that were the strong fit. Okay, so here's the uncomfortable question that I have to ask pretty much every time I speak with somebody who's had this kind of application to interview ratio. Okay, is the answer is almost always much lower than they expected. Okay, I want you to answer this question properly. Okay, of those 300 applications that you've sent, how many were genuinely strong matches? Not, I could probably do the job, and not, I really want to work for the company, not, oh, this seems really interesting. I mean, how many of them were actually genuinely strong, okay, in terms of alignment? Okay, where, in the resume that you've used for the application, the last 2 roles clearly demonstrate the thing that they're hiring for. Okay, I've had people go through their last 20 applications honestly, and then find that 15 plus of them were roles that they were essentially reaching for. What that means is roles that they never had actual alignment to in the first place. And 15 out of 20 is not a strategy. Okay, that's just purely hoping. Okay, so what you need to do, okay, as an exercise is do a job fit analysis tier rank. Okay, do that over your last 10 applications. So there's a skill MD file inside Job Seeker OS, which you can use, which is just job fit analysis tier rank. Okay, and what you need to do is actually do an analysis there. Okay, don't do it with new roles. Look at the roles you've already applied for, because if most of them come back as a tier 3 alignment or a tier 4 alignment, then you have your answer. Okay, that would then suggest that you've got a targeting problem rather than a resume problem. Okay, fix that first, because rewriting your resume to be better at applying for the wrong jobs helps absolutely nobody. Okay, and here's the reframe that I would like you to take away from this. Okay, 300 applications is not evidence of effort. Okay, not at all. Okay, anybody can do that. It's evidence that you've been applying to a lot of roles that were never ever going to convert. Okay, 20 properly targeted applications a week will beat 60 scattered ones every time. Okay, and you can even reduce that. Okay, 10 applications that are genuinely targeted in a tier 1 or a tier 2 alignment, okay, will always beat 100 applications where you've not actually understood the goal of the hiring company. Okay, if you understand the alignment every time, and then you can genuinely evidence examples where you have worked on similar problems or worked on similar solutions at a similar scale, okay, then your application to interview ratio will increase. Okay, it'll also take you less time. Okay, only apply to jobs that you're genuinely a good fit for. Okay, if you apply to jobs that you're not a good fit for, you're just going to be wasting your time. Okay, and I do appreciate that everybody has different time constraints, different things that they have to do during the week, which means that they might have a less of a time block to genuinely devote to their job search. Okay, but if you want to get the most bang for your buck, okay, you want to get the most out of the time that you invest, then only apply for jobs that you're genuinely aligned to. So every time that you find a job and you think that you might want to apply for it, do a tier rank analysis first. Okay, if you're tier 1, 2, or 3, then apply. If you're tier 4, never apply. But you need to make sure that you spend most of your time and most of the applications that you send are a tier 1 alignment and a tier 2 alignment. Okay, so I don't know whether to target senior roles or go back a level to mid. Okay, I keep flip-flopping. How do I decide? Okay, so the simple answer to this is you don't decide what level you are. Okay? The market dictates what level you are. Okay? I know how that sounds, but like, stay with me on this because it is actually the most liberating thing that I can tell you about this question. Okay, I get asked this constantly, and I understand the paralysis because it feels like a decision about your worth. Okay, but it's not. It's a decision about market positioning. And once you separate those two things, okay, it stops being about an identity crisis and becomes something that you can actually work out, okay, objectively in a short amount of time. Okay, years of experience is the weakest signal that there is. Okay, I've had senior people with 4 years of experience and turned down people with 12 years experience for the same role. Okay, what actually determines level is scope. So, how big was the budget that you owned? How many people did you report to, directly or otherwise? Okay, what decisions could you make without asking for permission? How senior were the stakeholders that you dealt with routinely, like on a daily basis? Okay, and also, like, what was the blast radius actually looking like when you got something wrong? Which is something that a lot of people just don't consider. Okay, so here's what I'd do this week. Okay, it'll take 30 minutes to an hour of your time. Okay, but it'll be well worth it. Pull 10 job adverts, like a senior level in your market. Okay, and 10 that would be considered mid-level. Okay, read them properly, not for the requirements, but for the scope described. Okay, then honestly compare them to what your last 2 roles actually involved. Okay, not what your title said, but what you actually did. Okay, because title company to company is going to vary, and the responsibilities or actions that come with that title company to company is also going to vary massively. Okay, one set of those job adverts will match better. Okay, and that's your answer. Okay, and it'll be more obvious than you expect. What you need to remember is that there is no one uniform way to write a job description. Okay, so you need to do the analysis to understand where you're positioned in the market. Okay, now here's the direct bit. So if you've been applying at senior level for months and getting nothing back at all, it's not really a mystery. Okay, and that's the market essentially answering the question for you. Okay, it's worth listening to rather than pushing harder against. Okay, but don't like overcorrect it either, because applying below your level is its own problem. Okay, you don't want to be doing that. Okay, so what I would do here is I would make sure that when you find a job description, I would also always do a skills gap analysis. Okay, so there's a skill MD file inside Job Seeker OS that does this for you. Okay, I would do it against both levels. So get your resume or the resume that you've been applying for. Okay, find 5 different senior level job descriptions, or take the 10, do the full analysis, the 10 senior, 10 mid level. Do a skill gap analysis against both. Okay, it'll show you exactly what's missing for senior. Okay, and it'll tell you exactly what's missing for mid level roles or where you're actually overqualified. Okay, if the gap is 1 or 2 things and they're closable, target senior and work towards closing them. If it's 5 things or 5 plus things and they're all scope based, then make sure that you are targeting mid level deliberately. Okay, do it well and then move up from inside. Okay. The version of this that goes badly is applying to both. Okay, you don't want to be applying to different level roles, okay, where you think you're genuinely targeting the market. Okay, you don't want to be applying to both with the same resume, okay, because there'll be no clear story that actually makes yourself aligned for both. Pick, comment, and then give it about 6 weeks before you reassess. Okay, don't apply for roles for a week off the back of analysis. Go, oh, this isn't working, and then iterate again, and iterate again. It's one of the biggest mistakes that I see. You got to remember that companies may take 1, 2, 3 weeks to actually reply to an application. Okay, so you've got to see it out. Okay, that would be my advice for that. Give it 6 weeks and then reassess if you still haven't seen a change in the market. Okay. So I'm a generalist and every single job advert seems to want a specialist. How do I compete? Okay. So the term generalist is not a position. Okay, it's the absence of one. Okay? I know that's going to annoy some people, so let me explain exactly what I mean. Because I actually think broad experience is genuinely valuable, and I'm not about to tell you to pretend that you don't have it. Okay. I am challenging the premise here because I think the framing is the thing that hurt you, okay, not your background. The problem is that nobody hires a generalist. Okay, nobody has ever written a business case that says we need someone who can do a bit of everything. Okay, they hire someone to solve a specific problem that's costing them money or time. Okay, or it could be obviously to fix a very specific other problem. Okay, but if your opening line is that you can do lots of things, then you've not told them which problem that you actually solve. So they move on and then find someone who actually has fixed that specific problem. Okay, but here would be the fix. So it's not about pretending to be something that you're not. Okay, because inevitably when you interview or when you start a job, if you manage to get through a whole process, they would find out that you're not a specialist, okay, in something that you genuinely have no experience with. Okay, lead with the specialism that is most in demand in your market. Okay, then use the breadth as the differentiator underneath it. Okay, don't use that as a headline about you. So instead of something like I'm an operations generalist with experience across finance, product, and supply chain. Okay, which sounds like essentially a shrug. It becomes I'm a supply chain operations lead who has worked across finance and product, which means I can see where the handoffs break before they break. Okay, something like that. Okay, that's the exact same person profile. Okay, with the same experience, but a completely different reception. So the first one has to work out what you are, and then the second one tells them, and it gives them a reason. And your breadth there is an advantage rather than a lack of focus. Okay, the thing that you have to accept is this means choosing. Okay, and choosing feels like potentially closing doors to some people. Okay, particularly if part of why you're a generalist is that you genuinely enjoy variety in the work that you do. Okay, and I understand that, but you are not choosing forever. Okay, you're choosing for this particular job search. Okay, and an unfocused search or an untargeted search in this regard closes more doors than a focused one ever will. Okay, what I would do is I would run a personal brand statement exercise. Okay, you can do this using Job Seeker OS. Okay, using personal brand statement. Okay, and it'll force you into one clear positioning sentence. Okay, then you can use that everywhere on your resume, LinkedIn. If you're reaching out to somebody, if somebody gives you a call, you can essentially use that in conversation. Okay, it's similar. I wouldn't use this as a replacement, but it's similar to like tell me about yourself. Okay, consistency across all of the different assets that you use is what makes a generalist or somebody that quote unquote says they're a generalist. It makes them look like a specialist with range. Okay, rather than someone who's still deciding where they fit or what value they add. Okay. Honestly, is it me or is the market just terrible right now? I can't tell anymore. Okay. So I'm not going to answer that question, okay? Not because it's a bad question, but because as it's framed, it can't help you, okay? And I think that this framing is keeping you stuck. Okay, both things are actually just true at the same time. Okay, it's you and it's also the market. Okay, in some ratio, but the question does not resolve to one or the other. Okay, so while you're sitting with it, nothing gets fixed. Okay, so let me give you the question that actually does help. Okay, where in the funnel is it actually breaking? Okay, and when we talk about funnel, we're talking about all of the different inputs or resources or actions that comprise your job search. Okay, because that tells you what's wrong. Okay, and importantly, it tells you what's within your control and what's essentially not within your control. Okay, if you're sending applications and getting essentially nothing back, that is almost never the market. Okay, even in a really difficult market. Okay, a well-targeted application to a genuinely well-matched role gets a response at some rate. Okay, silence at the very top means targeting. Okay, the actual jobs that you think you're aligned to or that you're applying to, and potentially also resume proof. So if you're getting responses and screens, but they stop there, that is usually the screen itself. Okay, your opener, your salary answer, or a mismatch that becomes obvious in the first 10 minutes and wasn't necessarily obvious on paper, your resume, when somebody was reviewing it. Okay, if you were getting to interviews but not finals, then that's story quality. Okay, your examples aren't landing, they're not linked to what the company actually needs. Okay, and if you're consistently reaching final rounds and losing, then that's genuinely just competition. Okay, and that's where the market is real and a legitimate factor. Okay, if you're coming second out of 200 in a market with hiring freezes and huge candidate pool, then you were doing almost everything right. Okay, and you're just being beaten. Okay, or you're being outcompeted by circumstance. Okay, so the honest answer depends entirely on which of those you are. Okay, now we look at like a direct part. Okay, and I'll say it with as much care as possible. The market is the most comfortable explanation available, okay, because it's the only one that requires nothing from you. Okay, if you blame the market, you can just sit back and say, well, it's not me, I don't need to change anything, the market's just tough. Okay, and then 9 months in, when you're exhausted, that comfort is genuinely appealing. Okay, I would just want you to make sure it is a conclusion rather than a resting place. Okay, so what I would actually look at here is the data. Okay, if you're not tracking all of the different inputs that you're doing, then that's the first place to start tracking it. Okay, if you have been tracking it, what I would do is I would get your actual numbers on paper or on the screen in front of you. Okay, and then do a weekly review. Okay, don't just log things and never look at it because it's pointless. Okay, you've got to look at number of applications, responses, number of screens, interviews, finals. Okay, most people have never seen their own like funnel written down, and the pattern is usually visible within about 5 to 10 minutes of looking at it. Okay, there is a skill that you can use in Job Seeker OS to do this. So job search weekly review, okay, and it'll analyze all of your data for you, so you don't have to spend loads of time looking at it. Okay, it'll give you an answer in less than a minute. Okay, have a look at that. Try and pinpoint where you think the problems might land. Okay, whether it's pre-application, whether it's at application, whether it's at screening, interview, final stage, whatever it may be. Try and pinpoint which part of the process, which part of the funnel you think you're potentially failing at or having issues with. Okay, then come back to me with those numbers and we'll work out which of the different stages it could possibly be. And that's a much more useful conversation than me trying to guess what your job search may have look like. Because if I'm just essentially speculating on what you may have done, then I might be answering something that's completely irrelevant for you. Okay. Okay. So I actually hear this question a lot. I'm applying for about 5 different job titles because I could do all of them. Is it a mistake? Okay. So a really good way to put this is 2 job titles at 50% effort will beat 5 at 20% effort. Okay. Every single time. So very short answer, yes, it is a mistake, okay, but probably not for the reason that you're expecting, okay? The problem's not that you're incapable of doing 5 different jobs or landing 5 different jobs, okay? You very likely are capable of all of them, okay? The problem is that you can't run 5 searches properly at the same time. Think about what each target actually requires if you do it well, okay? Its own resume version, because the evidence that you lead with will change, okay? Its own positioning and summary, its own company list, because companies hiring delivery managers, okay, are not identical to the ones that are hiring program managers, okay, in all senses. Its own network inside of those companies, okay, its own interview prep, because the questions will differ. So there's a whole host of things in terms of your targeting and your prep that will change. So, okay, that means you've essentially then got 5 parallel work streams, okay, and nobody realistically has the hours to do that, okay? So what happens in practice is you'll do all 5 about 20% quality, okay, which means you're competing against people doing one, okay, one stream at 90%, okay? And in a competitive market, 20% effort loses to that 90% pretty much every single time, regardless of whether you could technically do the job. Okay, so 2 targets at 50% would beat 5 at 20. Okay, that's the whole argument. Okay, here's what I would do: pick a primary target and then have a secondary one if it's relevant. Okay, and here's the test for whether you have picked well. Okay, they should be close enough that roughly 80% of your evidence works for both. Okay, with only the emphasis changing. Okay, if your 2 targets need genuinely different resumes with different achievements pulled forward, then they're too far apart, and you've picked 2 primaries rather than a primary and a secondary. Okay, the other thing to actually remember here is, if, for example, you were, like, let's just change the industry. So let's say you were a targeting data science, data analysis, data engineering. Okay, and let's say let's have 5: data analysis, data science, data analysis, data engineering, machine learning, and let's say a machine learning engineer, and let's say a machine learning research role. Okay, you've got 5 different things there. What you've got to do is put yourself in the employer's shoes. So let's imagine that you applied for a job, okay, and they went and looked at your LinkedIn profile. Okay, so if you have in your headline, okay, because you're trying to apply for 5 different roles, you have those 5 different roles in there, you're going to look like a generalist. Okay, so we're kind of building on one of the previous questions. You're going to look like a generalist. You're not going to look targeted. They won't know what you do, and because they've never had the pleasure of speaking to you, you won't have had the chance for you to explain what it is that you're doing in relation to their specific opportunity. So all that will do is it will absolutely crush, okay, in a bad way, the ability for somebody to actually understand your value. Okay, so this is what I would do, right? You can run a job advert decoder. Okay, you can do that with Job Seeker OS across the 5 different titles. Okay, take 3 real adverts for like each title. Okay, and what you'll usually find is that they cluster. Okay, 2 or 3 of them are essentially the same job with different labels, and 1 or 2 are just genuinely different. Okay, it won't always be that ratio, but there's no view for you. That clustering tells you where to focus, and it's much more reliable than deciding based on the title that you like the sound of. Okay, one more thing is, once you have picked, give it a few weeks, okay, before you reassess. Switching targets every fortnight is the same problem as having 5. Okay, it just feels more decisive. So give it 6 weeks. Okay, then reassess. Don't just go, right, I've gone from applying to 5 roles to targeting 2, and now I'm still not getting interviews, so I'm going to change again, I'm going to change again. Because you've got to wait for the responses of the companies. Okay, not every company is going to get back to you within a few days. Okay, now. Okay, I'm trying to change industry, and it feels like nobody will even look at me. What am I missing? Okay, so let me tell you exactly what happens when a recruiter opens the profile of somebody changing industry. Okay, it's not what most people imagine, and once you know it, the fix is obvious. Okay, they're not sitting there judging whether you're capable. Okay, they're not looking for reasons to say no. Okay, they see one clear chapter. Okay, in this example, so it was teaching moving into L&D. Okay, so what we'll see is teaching, and then a second chapter. Okay, it says L&D, or learning and development. Okay, and there's nothing visible connecting the 2. So it reads as 2 separate things rather than one continuous story, if that makes sense. And the natural conclusion is you're starting over. Okay, nobody, or it's very, very, very rare, but nobody wants to hire someone who's starting over when there's a queue of people who are not starting over. Okay, who are genuinely just done that thing. Okay, and that's the whole problem, and it is fixable, but not by adding more keywords or applying to more roles. Okay, so you need to name the transferable capability very, very clearly. Okay, don't gesture at it. You've got to name it, and it has to be a genuine one. Okay, it can't just be a vibe, or I really wanted to move, or it's really appealing to me, or I'm very interested in it. So in this example, so for teaching into L&D, it's right there and it's strong. Okay, you'll understand how adults actually learn, as opposed to how organizations may assume that they learn. Okay, you've designed for comprehension under real constraints, you've delivered the same material to rooms that respond completely differently, and you will have like adjusted live. Okay, you've measured whether something landed rather than assuming it did because you just covered it. Okay, most L&D people have never had to do that with 30 people who did not choose to be there. Okay, so that's not a stretch, it's a genuinely competitive advantage. Okay, and it's invisible on your resume. Okay, here's a test that I would give you. So, can you say the connection in one sentence? And if you can't, then that means that they can't either. Okay, and they're going to give you around 6 seconds reviewing your application because there'll be hundreds of other people that are also applying for the same role. So, you need to be able to communicate your value and your connection to that role in one sentence, and that's what you've got to figure out. Okay, there is a skill to help you do this in Job Seeker OS. It's called Career Pivot Bridge. Okay, what it does is it maps the transferable capability properly, and then it builds the narrative that you can then use consistently across your resume, your LinkedIn, interviews. And consistency is what turns confusion into, that makes complete sense. Okay. One more thing, and I want to be honest rather than encouraging here. Okay, is some pivots need a stepping stone. Okay, and some don't. So teaching to L&D is a short bridge in many cases. Okay, not in every case, and it's very doable, kind of directly. Okay, but teaching to investment banking isn't, and no amount of narrative fixes that. Okay, so if you find after another 2 months of good execution that it's still not moving, then we should talk about whether there's an intermediate step. Okay, like an edtech company, for example, where your background is an asset rather than like a translation problem. Okay, so there are different ways to look at it. Okay, I keep getting told I'm overqualified. Okay, and what does that actually mean, and how do I get past it? Okay, 6 months searching, senior finance. Okay, so I'm assuming that this is from like an interview situation or maybe from an application stage, so it must be like a hiring manager that's told you this. So when a hiring manager tells you that you're overqualified, they are almost never talking about your skills. Okay, overqualified is one of the least honest words in hiring. Okay, a lot of the time it's just a get out. Okay, it's a polite word covering something that they don't want to say out loud. Okay, and once you know what it's actually covering, then your whole response changes. Okay, it's one of three things. Okay, and they'll almost never tell you which. Okay, number one is maybe they'll think you'll leave. Okay, they believe you're taking this because you have to, and the moment that something better appears on the market, you're going to be gone. Okay, then what that means for them is that they're going to be recruiting again in 6, 8 months' time. Okay, which is super expensive. Okay, and you always need to factor that in. It'll be super expensive. It'll make the hiring manager look bad. It's not going to be good. Okay, so number one, they think you're going to leave. Okay, number two is maybe they can't afford you. Okay, so they'll look at your profile and instead of wasting hours upon hours of time kind of discussing the opportunity with you and learning about your background, they'll just make a snap decision and think, we can't afford you. Okay, so they've assumed your experience based on maybe your last title, the company you've worked for, or whatever else they might have seen, is essentially just ruled you out. Okay, and there's nothing you can really do about that. It's just case by case. The third thing is they might think that you'll be difficult to manage. Okay, particularly if you'll be reporting into someone less experienced than you. Okay, they're maybe imagining you second guessing decisions in meetings. Okay, or always offering up a different like solution or a different way to do things based on your experience. Okay, and it could potentially be damaging for their like internal communications, way of working, operations, whatever it may be. Okay, all three of those are essentially risks. Okay, it's not capabilities. The mistake that almost everyone makes is by responding by proving their skills harder. Okay, which addresses a concern that nobody actually has. Okay, and it can just make it worse. Okay, address the risk instead. Okay, and do it proactively rather than waiting to be asked. Okay, so only even you need a genuine specific reason that this role makes sense for you now. Okay, not I need a new job. Okay, which we'll just assume anyway because you've applied. It needs to be something like I spent 6 years running an increasingly large team. Okay, sorry, increasingly large teams. And what I actually want to get back is maybe like the hands-on or analytical work. Okay, say that this role deliberately allows you to return to that. Okay, and it's not a stopgap. It's something that you generally want to do because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's believable because it's specific. It's slightly against your own interests, and it's exactly what makes it land. Okay, name it early rather than letting them guess. Okay, that's probably the best tip I can give you. If you're genuinely comfortable with the range, say so plainly at the screen stage, and essentially, if it's anything to do with management, say the thing that they're going to be too politely to ask. Okay, I've worked with managers more junior than me before, and it's been fine. My job will be able to make them look good, etc., etc., etc. And then you've disclosed it. Okay, the bit that I would push on is if you're hearing this repeatedly. Okay, it's not like a one-off thing or once in a blue moon. Okay, sit with the question of whether you're actually targeting below your level more often than you're actually admitting. Okay, sometimes overqualified is a real signal about aim rather than a communication problem. Okay, so it's worth checking honestly before you actually optimize the answer. Okay, so should I take a contract role or hold out for something permanent? Okay, so you've got 3 months of runway left. Okay, if you've got 3 months of savings left, okay, which I assume that's what you mean, you've got 3 months of savings left, then it's not really like a strategy question, okay? And I suspect that somewhere you already know that. Okay, so let's just be direct, okay, before we get into the pros and cons, because I think the framing matters more than the actual answer. Okay, so with 3 months of runway and you've already been searching for 4 months, you're not choosing between like two equal options. You're choosing between income and then extra risk, okay, or less risk. And decisions made from a position of financial pressure are almost always worse decisions, okay, because urgency narrows your thinking, and it also shows in interviews as well. So recruiters can smell it, okay, and it costs you leverage in every negotiation. Okay, so my honest advice is to run with both pipelines properly rather than choosing. Okay, here's what contracts like genuinely give you. Okay, and people a lot of the time do underrate this. So the process is way faster. Okay, often it'll be a week or two. Okay, rather than 2 months plus in some cases for permanent roles. Okay, I've personally hired for people for contract positions where we've done it in literally one stage and it's done. Okay, there's usually less competition because a lot of permanent candidates rule themselves out. It gets you back in the market and working, which changes how you then perceive if you were to then apply for a permanent position again, and it just stops the gap growing. Okay, and that matters more than what most people think. Okay, but what it costs you. Okay, in some sectors and in some countries, it's harder to move from contract back to permanent. Okay, and you should be honest about whether yours or your country, your location, your industry potentially is one of them. Okay, it can complicate visa situations significantly. So if that applies to you, then it needs checking before anything else. Okay, and you also just need to remember that it will end. Contracts end. Okay, so you may be doing this again in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time. Okay, I've also hired for contracts that are literally just 2 months long. So if you want to avoid the job search again, okay, maybe have a think about that too. Here's the thing that I want you to kind of hold on to. Okay, taking a contract does not close permanent searches. Okay, it usually funds it. So you keep applying, you keep networking, you just do it with a bit of pressure off, and you're also in a much stronger position now. Okay, I'm currently contracting at whatever company it is. Okay, is a considerably better place than trying to negotiate for a permanent position saying I've been out of work for 7 months. Okay, the version of this that goes wrong is stopping at the permanent search. Okay, once the contract starts, because the relief is usually enormous, and then you kind of take your foot off the gas. Okay, and then the urgency disappears. So don't do that. Always just keep the pipeline running. Okay, do it at a lower intensity, but you need to keep it running. And I always say that anyway. No matter if you've just secured a job, and let's say you've just secured a permanent job, I would always be job searching because you're always in a better position to land a job when you're employed. Okay, so never stop searching for opportunities, because even if you landed a job at a company and it's your dream company and you're super excited, you're off the market, you've been looking for a while, you never know what can happen. You may start and then there may be layoffs a month later, which is totally out of your control. So you should always be looking at opportunities. Okay, that would be the best advice here. Okay, one of the things that you can do is use the job board optimizer skill in Job Seeker OS. Okay, because contract roles, okay, surface on a lot of different job boards, okay, and through agencies a lot of the time, okay, which is very different to permanent jobs. Okay, so if you've been searching permanent channels for 4 months, you may simply not actually be seeing what's out there in terms of contract opportunities. So you can use the job board optimizer skill to actually run and see what's out there. Okay. Honestly, I don't know what I actually want to do next. Is it stupid to be job searching without knowing? Okay, so you are allowed to not know what you want. Okay, what you are not allowed to do is let not knowing become the strategy. Okay, and I want to say the first half of that properly. Okay, not as a throwaway, because I think a lot of people carry real shame about this one. Okay, and it stops them asking. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. 11 years in, not knowing what you want next is usually not a failure. Okay, it's not a failure of ambition. It's usually tied to things like exhaustion. Okay, or it is what happens when you've spent a decade being good at something you drifted into rather than actually chose. Okay, there's a lot of examples of that with people going into sales. Okay, people take sales jobs just because it's an industry or a job type with a lower barrier to entry in terms of like qualifications. Okay, so you kind of fall into it, and then you may be really really good at it, but it's something that you just absolutely hate. Okay, so I've seen a lot of examples like that where people don't know what they want to do. Okay, and then it affects their job search when they're looking to actually remove themselves and jump ship from that industry. Okay, it's incredibly common. It's not a character flaw at all. Now, if we want to answer this from a more direct standpoint, okay, you can't target without a decision. Okay, and job searching without a target is essentially the most expensive form of procrastination that there is. Okay, because it looks like progress, produces absolutely nothing. Okay, you'll apply broadly, you'll get a little back, and then you can just conclude that the market's hard. Okay, it's the toughest market ever, when actually you've never given the market a clear enough signal to actually respond. Okay, so we do need to get you a decision. Okay, but here's the unlock. Okay, it takes most of the pressure out. You do not need to know what you want to do for the next 10 years. Okay, you just need to pick the next 18 months. Okay, that's a much smaller question. Okay, what do you want to do for the next 18 months? Okay, we're not asking you about a whole career. Okay, and here's how I would get like practical about it. look at the last 3 roles, okay, that you've done, and go through them properly. What did you actually do day to day? And out of those things that you did day to day, what would you be happy doing again tomorrow? Okay, and then separately, what drained you? Okay, regardless of what you were good at, what drained you? Okay, because most people have never actually separated those two things, and they're the most useful data that you actually have. Because being good at something that you dislike is exactly how people end up 11 years in and then unsure. Okay, then form 2 hypotheses. So not one, because one is a guess. Okay, and you'll cling to it. You want 2, then test them. If you look at like 20 properly targeted applications, each over about a month, okay, with a resume and a positioning genuinely built for each one, then look back at what came, the market will tell you things about your positioning that no amount of just reflection will, okay, and it'll do it a lot faster. Okay, if you need like support doing this, then you can use Job Seeker OS. Okay, you can use the personal brand statement skill MD file, okay, for each of the 2 directions, and then run a skill gaps analysis against both. Okay, if one has a hard gate that you can't close in the time frame, okay, then that's the answer, and it costs you nothing to find out. Okay, you're allowed to not know. Okay, you are just not allowed to let not knowing become the strategy. Okay, write that down, and every time that you are potentially down about it, just look at that. Okay. Okay, how many jobs should I be applying to a week? I see wildly different advice. Okay, if you are counting how many jobs you apply to this week, you're measuring the wrong thing. Okay, and it's costing you. You see wildly different advice on this because the question itself doesn't work. Okay, I would rather fix the question than hand you a number that sounds essentially authoritative, but it's not. Here's why it doesn't work. Okay, the right number depends entirely on how many genuinely strong fit roles exist in your market in a given week. Okay, and that number isn't stable. Okay, so some weeks in a healthy market for a common role there might be 30. Okay, worth applying to. Some weeks for a niche senior in a narrow like geographical area there might be 4, and there might be 2. Okay, both of these are completely normal. Okay, if I tell you to do 15 a day and there are only 4 good ones, all I've done is instruct you to apply for like 11 jobs that are never going to convert, okay, which is worse than doing nothing because it costs you hours that you could have spent on networking, okay, or doing other inputs. So here's how I would actually like frame it correctly. Okay, treat the number as a ceiling, not a quota. Okay, apply to every role that's genuinely a strong fit. When you run out of strong fits, stop applying and go and do something else that moves the search forward. Okay, which is almost always something connected to networking, outreach, or potentially research. Okay, the metric that I would watch is not applications per week; it is strong fit applications per week. Okay, and separately the response rate from those applications. If your response rate's healthy, okay, and your only constraint is volume, then the problem is potentially discovery, and in which case you should focus on fixing the sourcing of jobs. Okay, if your volume's high and your response rate is poor, then volume's not the problem. Okay, and adding more roles won't actually help that. It won't fix it. Okay, padding your number, okay, usually is not diligence. Okay, it's avoidance. Okay, it might feel like progress. It produces satisfying count at the end of the week. Okay, and you can look at it and go, look at all the effort I put in. Okay, but all it does is it lets you avoid the hard work. Okay, which is the outreach, the follow-ups, and the honest look. Whether you're actually doing the targeting right. Okay, super simple. That's probably the best way that I could possibly explain it. Okay, what you can do here is if you wanted to like try and automate this to make it a bit easier, is you can use the job radar setup inside Job Seeker OS. Okay, it finds and then scores or assesses new roles daily, so you're deciding rather than searching. Okay, which means you'll actually know how many genuine fits exist each week rather than guessing. Okay, that number, okay, your number, is far more useful than anything that I can say. Okay, it's way more useful than me going apply to 10 roles or apply to 20 roles or apply to 30 roles. Okay? That's why if you see numbers online where people say, "Oh, I've applied to 300 jobs this month," but they're getting like 2 interviews or they're getting no interviews, it's because they're applying to most likely 290 jobs that were never a good fit. Okay, so applying to more jobs doesn't increase your likelihood of landing interviews. Applying to more strong fit or strong alignment roles could potentially increase the amount of interviews that you get. Okay, so there are 10 questions for today. If you have any questions, drop them below or reach out to me on LinkedIn or hop inside the accelerator because there is a request submission form that you can do where we actually go through and do really, really deep requests and questions, insights, reviews, whatever it may be. But anything that you're stuck on, if you drop them down below, I will do my best to try and select questions that may be interesting for other people. But if you want every single one of your questions answered, hop inside the accelerator. I'll leave a link in the description below.